improvise, adapt, and overcome.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Carry On podcast with your host, Brad Colbert, the Iceman, and our weekly SITREP edition, giving you a once around the world on military events, current events, and pretty much anything topical that I find of interest. And I've found a few things that I'm going to talk about today. Some exciting things, administrative. We have an upcoming newsletter that we are looking to put together, which is essentially just a reminder of some of the guests that we're going to have on. I'm also going to drop in some book reviews, movie reviews, because I love movies, and a few other surprises. If you want it, great. If you don't, it's fine too. I am always available via podcast, YouTube, and a host of other media. In addition to some of our wonderful content, we also have some amazing shows that we have been on and shows that are upcoming. So when they come, I will plug those in, give you a reminder, put links in below, etc., etc. So for those of you that have decided to show some additional support on the Patreon, I very much appreciate that. And use the contact email. If you have questions, comments, concerns, or you just want to rant, contact at bradcolbert.us. We read each and every one of them, and if we personally don't respond, I'll throw some stickers your way. Tonight's beverage is Mitcher's Sour Mash Whiskey, old company, been around since before the Revolution, as a matter of fact, according to their label anyways. It's good. I don't think it is as punchy whiskey as I would normally partake in, but I'll tell you, it's very drinkable. For those of you that are not entirely up to snuff on sour mash, perhaps that's something we can talk about in a future whiskey and bullshit episode available to our Patreon subscribers. Recently, we had Alex Lemons, author of the book War Body, on the show. Stay tuned for that episode to drop. The whiskey and bullshit is exceptionally good. I think you'll like it. So, moving on towards the topics of the day, let's do our normal MO and do the once around the world. And we're going to start with CENTCOM, the Middle East. If you have been paying attention to the crisis involving Iran, you are probably already familiar with the fact that there's a carrier strike group in the area. Carrier strike group presents a massive amount of projected U.S. force. Aegis destroyers, submarines, of course, the carrier itself, and all of the fixed and rotary wing aircraft that it has. There's also oftentimes a Coast Guard escort, which, before you decide to roll your eyes, don't underestimate the Coast Guard cutters. They do bring a lot to the table, not just in firepower, but command and control and search and rescue. So they are always a force multiplier. In addition to the carrier that's already on scene, Gerald Ford has just been tasked to enter the area as well. Now, they're not both going into Iranian waterways, but you are going to have both carrier strike groups within distance of Iran. This does a couple of messagings. It tells Iran that we are absolutely serious about a military option should diplomacy fail. And it also tamps down on any proxies that may decide to get excited in the area and continue with their small boat harassment campaigns and some of those drone attacks that we have seen previously. Now, in addition to that, in CENTCOM's AO, we also have the Al-Tanf drawdown. That is a U.S. installation that has been there since the initial civil war in Syria. It sits in a very strategic location in the corner of Jordan and Iraq and Syria, and that has been drawn down. Now, if you've been paying attention on previous SITREP editions, we've talked about U.S. forces drawing down in Syria and really consolidating towards a single location. So this was planned and this was forecasted. This is a deliberate transition of the anti-ISIS mission. One of the things that you want to watch for when we draw down postures like this is ISIS exploitation attempts. They may see this as U.S. forces weakening and decide to probe the lines or at least test our patience. It'd be a big mistake, but that's okay. They're welcome to try. It also allows partner forces to posture a bit more as well. So we're not doing this one alone. We do have building relationship with the newly incepted, I'm not really sure, Syrian government. We've talked about the person that's at the helm in previous SITREP editions, and he's not exactly the nicest guy, more of the person that is there conveniently at the moment. Now, CENTCOM did report strikes against ISIS targets in Syria January 27th, all the way up to February 2nd, while a lot of our joint partners in the area sustained pressure. So this is not going away. This is an enduring mission, but it is a reconsolidation that I think is in keeping with President Trump's national defense strategy of 2025, and then kind of just our evolution on global events. We will continue to attack ISIS and other terrorist organizations wherever we find them, but we also have other business as well. So it's reduced fixed exposure politically and militarily while maintaining overwatch and continue to do strikes. So yeah, we'll report on activities involving the carrier strike groups, plural, if there are any, but so far things have been pretty quiet, and it's kind of what I expected. Moving over to SOUTHCOM, the Western Hemisphere, we are continuing to conduct lethal strikes, and they are escalating on, narco trafficking, I believe is the buzzword that is being used for these vessels operating along known routes in the Eastern Pacific. Specifically, they struck a target on the 9th of February and 5th of February. Both attributed towards Joint Task Force Southern Spear. Remember, you've got a large amount of U.S. ships parked off the coast and in those waterways, to include a Marine Amphibious Readiness Group, which has, a couple thousand Marines on it. Campaign, it's operationally linked to the Coast Guard's broader interdiction surge. So they're really there as enablers. They're not the focus of the Southern Spear Joint Task Force. Command transition, SOUTHCOM. This is not super topical. It did take place on January 5th. So for what it's worth, we did have a change of command. The commanding general of SOUTHCOM changed, and we have a Marine general, General Donovan, whom I met on a few occasions. It seemed like a stand-up guy. He's got a great resume. I mean, what more do you need to know? He's a Marine. So I expect that he is going to take charge pretty quickly. He's replacing an Air Force Lieutenant General. I don't know the gentleman, Evan Pettus, Pettus. So I apologize. I have cautioned you in the past that I am challenged linguistically when it comes to some of these names, and I don't speak foreign. So yeah. Canal, Panama security training activities. We've got exercise Panamax Alpha 2026. I swear to goodness, I don't know who comes up with these names, but I love it. So that's with SOUTHCOM support, and that's things like jungle operations, patrolling, survival, medevac. It's basically strengthening our partner ties with the Panamanian forces. And we've had some pretty good relationships with them, for decades now. So that's enduring task. The United States military does joint training with most countries in the world, at least the ones that are not trying to actively assassinate us. So this is just news, nothing particularly exciting, but putting it on your radar. We also have the U.S. Naval Institute that reported a collision on the 12th of February between a replenishment ship and another naval ship, the USS Truxtun. Now, I will explain just a little bit about this. This is fascinating, having participated in many of these before. A United States naval ship underway in the ocean has a couple of options for replenishing its perishable supplies, whether it's food, whether it's ammunition, whether it's diesel, aviation, gas, you name it. It can pull into a port, and it can take on supplies from that port. It can do a vertical replenishment, where helicopters will sling load equipment, drop it onto the flight deck of the ship, and flight deck doesn't have to be big. When you're sling loading equipment, it can be relatively small space. But the predominant way that it's done is what's called an underway replenishment. You have a replenishment ship or a supply ship. In this case, it is the USNS Supply. Great name. Love it. And the supply ship will pull up alongside the vessel that is going to be replenished. And they take an M14, they shoot a line across. That line is attached to a bigger line and a bigger line. And eventually a fuel hose or two will make their way across on a cable. And in addition to that, you're going to have another cable used to bring supplies over. It's basically like a zip line. You have pallets of equipment wrapped in net. It's attached to a metal clevis. It's attached to a zip line, and the zip line just goes from one ship to the next. And all of this is done while both ships are maneuvering. Now, in this case, there was the supply ship in the middle, and you had a ship on the left, and you had a ship on the right. And it's not unheard of. It's a tricky maneuver, but it's doable. All three ships have to maintain the same speed. They have to maintain the same course, but it's an ocean. And in this particular instance, the ocean decided to push back. The ships nudged one another. Two sailors had minor injuries, and the ships were fine. One of them pulled into port, probably to hammer out the dents and to put a fresh coat of paint on. But this type of underway replenishment happens all the time with ships. It just so happens that two bumped into one another. Now, I will tell you, while it's most assuredly no one's fault, somebody is going to get cold on the carpet for that, especially when it makes the news. Okay, moving on. CENTCOM is continuing to put more coercive actions and maritime emphasis and more willingness to label trafficking networks in these quasi-terrorist terms. And it is interesting to listen to because words matter. And when you start changing the definitions of some of these narco or drug suppliers to narco terrorists, the legal justification increases with it, at least insofar as the U.S. laws are concerned, which, let's be honest, that's what we're focused on. So striking boats and seizing cargo vessels can produce immediate disruptions, but it also creates lawfare exposure. We have disputes over jurisdiction, proportionality, and political blowback, especially if our adversaries frame it as a blockade behavior or extraterritorial enforcement. So when we start codifying some of these targets as terrorists, be they narco or otherwise, it kind of is just the law that we have to play in order to continue to do this. So we talked about Panama. When we frame this interoperability as training, Panamax branded activity, it does signal continuing U.S. priority on the Canal District. And it really, if you read through the lens, it's this wider U.S.-China competition and regional politics. China is incensed that they were booted out of Venezuela. They had road and belt initiatives with that country. They were clearly profiting from oil, and not necessarily from their pocketbook, but they needed that petroleum, and we basically just took it away from them. So when we strengthen our ties with countries in our hemisphere, it is in altruistic reasons, but it is also to give a huge signal towards Russia and China. Okay, let's go over to INDOPACOM, so India Pacific. The U.S. Naval Institute reports that the Army stood up a rotational force in the Philippines. Army Rotational Force Philippines is actually the name of it. They can't all be winners, right? Some of these names are just rather innocuous. It's a meaningful breadcrumb towards more persistent, distributed ground presence. And I think this is going to be a normal rotation for the United States Army in the Philippines. And we have had a long relationship with the Philippines going all the way back to World War II, probably a little bit before that, to be perfectly honest with you. But we need the Philippines for their strategic location, and they have had a lot of disagreements with China. So anytime we can go in there and disrupt China's playbook, it is a good thing. Philippine state media describes a February 2nd live ammunition drop involving U.S. PAC B-52s. Great aircraft, by the way, part of the nuclear triad for the United States and the oldest flying aircraft in our inventory, by the way. I mean, it goes way back towards the 1950s, but fantastic aircraft still flying. And again, this is purely aimed at deterrence messaging towards China. We have the Seabees returning to INDOPACOM after a long gap. So the Seabees is the Navy Construction Battalion. It's NM, Naval Maritime Construction Battalion, or CB, right? For the last two letters in the acronym. And NMCB 11 is returning after, it's been, the last time they were there was 1953. Interesting footnote on NMCB 11. The only CB battalion, that's a bit redundant, the only construction battalion in the Navy to have had a Medal of Honor recipient. Great history. If you want to look them up on the internet, fantastic. Goes all the way back. They were attacked and machine gun nests were stormed. I mean, it's the kind of stuff that gives you goosebumps when you read it. February 9th, we had U.S. forces boarded and interdicted a tanker, the Aquila 2. Aquila, A-Q-U-I-L-A. Aquila. I just like the name. In the Indian Ocean, of all places. So what does this say? It's no longer restricted towards waters off of the coast of Venezuela, i.e. part of the littoral blockade. They trailed the ship for a while, saw where it had departed from, was going to. They pursued it all the way from the Caribbean. And it's a right of visit maritime interdiction and boarding is what Pete Hegseth has described it. And it went off without incident. It was carrying 700,000 barrels of Venezuelan heavy crude bound for China, according to the schedules from the state company that owns the ship. So by their own admission, it was part of a somewhat shadow fleet. Most tankers in this flotilla have been returned to Venezuela or seized by U.S. military forces. So we're slowly chipping away at this shadow fleet of tankers that are transiting oil that, according to us, they shouldn't be, right? So the vessel is consistently described by some media sources as sanctioned or Russian-linked shadow fleet. However, other side of that, multiple outlets are reporting it as a Panamanian flagged or flag unclear unknown in its database, rather than definitively Russian flagged. But a lot of these shadow tankers are turning off their transponders. They are changing flags mid-voyage. And so you can't always rely on what they may espouse on the outside of the boat or over the radio. All of this signals really our willingness to enforce these sanctions and these interdictions far outside of the Caribbean. And I think it sends a powerful message to those that are continuing to exploit some of our red lines. Moving over to Europe Command, we had a large NATO-linked artillery and fires exercise called Dynamic Front 26. It is something that the U.S. Army does every year. It's their premier European artillery and fires exercise. Brings together a lot of different NATO allies and partners to enhance interoperability. It's, again, almost like some of the other exercises I've mentioned this evening. It continues to strengthen ties and work out a lot of the standard operating procedures. Involved a lot of countries. We had U.S., we had Italy, Spain, Romania, Kosovo, all conducting live fire training, simulating and validating command and control systems across 4 different countries. So that, it's pretty good. In addition to the kinetics, we also discussed lethal and non-lethal across land, air, sea, cyber, and space. And cyber and space, that's the latest terrain. So they are included when we talk about, air, land, and sea. You're going to hear space and cyber almost always added on because it is terrain, especially space. We'll talk about that in the next segment. So, yeah, we're continuing to encourage Europe to be responsible for its own defense. It is not an overnight transition, and it is going to require a tremendous amount of introspection from a lot of these European Union countries, specifically Germany. If you don't know, Germany is really the logistical backbone of NATO. Without Germany, NATO doesn't work. They provide a tremendous amount of logistics, whether it's transit hubs, rail hubs, ports. I mean, if U.S. forces and some other countries' forces are going to flow in to theater, they're going to do it through Germany. They also have a fairly loud voice in NATO and in the European Union at large, for their economical prowess, and a couple of other reasons. NATO is not a fragile military construct, but I will tell you that it's made up of people, and people are messy. And if it seems like I'm digressing slightly, I am, and I apologize for that. I was just reading an article about a 3-day war game that took place involving a couple of different individuals. It was a war game to decide what would happen if the Russian forces were to mass on the border of Lithuania, which is a NATO country, and then force their way through. And yeah, it was interesting. At the end of the war game, what it really demonstrated was the NATO's paralysis if the United States fails to basically take the top rung of the escalation ladder. But that's a story for another time. Let's continue our walk around the world and move to Africa. Recent strikes on the 10th of February against Al-Shabaab and ISIS Somalia on February 3rd. We already covered that one, but I wanted to throw it in there just for context. This has been explicitly coordinated with Somalia's federal government, and it's pretty good. Essentially, the U.S. is continuing to hold to this low visibility, high precision model designed to degrade leadership and capability, but not requiring a large U.S. footprint. And it also helps reinforce partner legitimacy with the Somali government. It's great. I think it's great. NORTHCOM, wow. So that's us here in the continental United States. 10,000 or more service members are deploying or have deployed to augment Customs and Border Protection's mission, with numbers fluctuating as rotations and taskings change. Most of us have seen headlines talking about this, and it is continuing to expand as the administration sees fit, more or less. Major U.S. media reports controversy around the National Guard deployments. Understatement. Yeah, we'll see what happens. I don't want to get into that too much. We've talked about that before, and that's a rabbit hole I don't want to go down to this evening. So let's go up, and I mean way up. Let's go into space. Space Systems Command, essentially, is awarding launch task orders aimed at missile warning and missile tracking improvements. That's contracting stuff. That's infrastructure stuff. But, it's important. When we talk about space as terrain, and it absolutely is, that is, okay, I've said this before, but I can't get away from the cliche because I love it so much. It is the final frontier. I read a very interesting article earlier today from one of the scientific magazine publications about firing a gun in space and what would happen. Can you do it? Apparently you can. Gunpowder is self-oxidizing, which means it brings its own oxygen to the table. The projectile would propel. In fact, the projectile would go forever, and billions of years, according to, this particular article. And it just brought forth this amazing, quiet space battle that takes place on the moon long after I'm gone. Yeah, sorry, I really went down a rabbit hole. Okay, so Reuters reports that the Space Command just contracted for $3.5 billion for 72 infrared satellites. This is going to help us improve our missile warning and tracking. I feel things of this nature are infrastructure tying into our Golden Dome, which we talked about before. It's this missile defense system for the United States. I'd like to bring back Ronald Reagan's Star Wars initiative because I like the movie Spies Like Us, and I just makes me think of that movie, and now I want to go watch it. Maybe I will. Space Force is aligning more directly with Homeland Defense Command structures because remember we talked about this new NORTHCOM component, and it's going to tie in more and more into our strategic homeland defense. Okay. Let's move over to cyber. Lastly, new guidance and directives aimed at raising baseline security, essentially communications, secure communications adoption, edge device security. A lot of think tank analysis continue emphasizing cybercom's role in disrupting foreign activity when authorized and resourced. Essentially, cyber is being treated less like IT and more like operational terrain. But right now, a lot of the constraints, and we've talked about this before, are political, authority, policy, interagency synchronization, like who leads, who supports, who's accountable when it breaks. And as we've mentioned in past broadcasts, the United States Cyber Command is a very disparate command structure. Every branch of service has its own cyber component. A lot of the government agencies in the United States have their own cyber component. So trying to get a unified command, it's amorphous, and we haven't really gotten there yet. But yeah, we will. Okay, so that's kind of the once around the world, and yeah, if anything changes, we'll bring it up to you. So let's move on and talk about, I don't know, what do I want to talk about? Oh, let's do El Paso. That was a lot of fun. Okay. So February 10th, February 11th, the Federal Aviation Administration issued a NOTAMs, NOTAR. No, NOTAMs is Notice to Mariners, Notice to Aviation. It's an FAA safety authorization. They locked down the airspace in a 10-mile radius around El Paso's airport. And they couched it as a security concern. And they really didn't go into a whole lot more. It immediately started getting pushed out on the news wires. And I think I could hear tinfoil hats being made. It was ridiculous things like, well, they're just shutting it down because there's an inbound attack and they don't want to tell anyone and they're trying to protect themselves, or there was a lot. I'm not going to run through the gamut, but people lost their minds. Now, admittingly, this was not a routine airport delay. This is a very rare security-driven airspace interdiction, but there's a couple of things going on here. First and foremost, it exposed a seam between the Federal Aviation Security Authority and our Department of Defense counter-UAS testing and Department of Homeland Security and Customs and Border Protection operations. All of this has real implications for how the United States will handle cartel drones, domestic counter-drone weapons, and Civil Aviation Authority. So if we look at the timeline, what exactly happened, late February, around 11:30 Mountain Standard Time, FAA issues a temporary flight restriction or TFR. Now, ordinarily TFRs are in place when like Air Force One is flying and landing at a city. It just restricts all aviation outside of that area. There's a permanent one around the Capitol and the Pentagon and just north of Reagan, which is why if you've ever flown into Reagan, they have to make a pretty aggressive bank departing and coming in. So this halted all arrivals and departures at El Paso International. And initially it was framed as a security reason. And they said it could last for up to 10 days, which is, if you're doing the math, that's February 20th. And then immediately confusion spiked. The airlines and the local officials and even government stakeholders reported that they had little or no warning and very little and an unclear justification. Next day, February 11th, around 7 a.m., the FAA lifts the shutdown, stating there is no longer a threat to commercial aviation and flights resume. Now, when I saw the news report, what I did was I started looking at the map, looking at what was around there, and I had a pretty good idea of what was there already, but I wanted to refresh my memory. You have some Army bases, but you also have White Sands missile range. You have a large swath of area within the 10-mile no-fly zone where they are testing missiles. So I thought they're probably testing a counter-drone system, and they don't want any accidental attack, impacts to civilian aviation. Because oftentimes, if they were doing military testing, they would not restrict military flights in the area. So if it is a light flight helicopter or an ISR platform or a command and control platform that is airborne, or even just an aircraft that's helping to run sensors on whatever test they're running, it would normally be allowed to fly. And in this case, it wasn't. So that kind of made me think they were testing a counter drone technology, and then they just didn't want to risk a civilian aircraft going down. But the next day, it was lifted. And what the official line was, it was a cartel drone threat that was neutralized. And then I saw another story that had said it wasn't a drone, it was a party balloon. It's kind of fallen off the radar publicly, but there's still news outlets that are out there that are reporting that there was cartel drones that were reported to have made an incursion into U.S. airspace across the border from the south, and that they were shot down. But inside baseball narrative, the trigger for this shutdown, the TFR, may have been a laser-based counter-drone system that was being tested or used near El Paso, adjacent to the Fort Bliss area. In my mind, that's the more likely story. Doesn't mean that there's not a boatload of drones from bad actors flying across the border, because there absolutely are. But I think that in this case, a more likely scenario was they were testing a new counter-drone system, and they didn't want civilian aviation or any aviation to be in the area. But this raises concerns holistically about aviation safety and forcing a blunt safety action. This incident sits inside of a broader U.S.-Mexico tension arc over these cartel drones. The Mexican president says, we don't know what we're talking about. I don't believe that. I think we do know what we're talking about. There has been something like, 27,000 drones that have flown within 500 meters of the U.S.-Mexican border. A lot of these making their way over. Anyways. But we're kind of missing the point here, which is that the shutdown happened first, and then the explanation came later, and the explanation itself is contested across different agencies and reporting. Was it drones? Was it a counter-drone system that the U.S. military was testing? Was it a party balloon that somebody mistook? I'm not buying that, because if it was, you wouldn't have the foresight to restrict airspace ahead of time for 10 days and then just lift it. The Federal Aviation Administration, their assertion is that if an on-the-ground counter-drone activity has the potential to introduce uncertain hazards to commercial aircraft, then their fail-safe, their default fail-safe is to close the airspace. They just ground aircraft and they close it, even if the move is politically ugly. And I get it. The United States, since September 11th, I mean, let's be honest, since planes were flying, we're very sensitive to airplane crashes. Absolutely understand. But that's their culture. Remove the aircraft from the equation, which, if you look at the implication for this, you can expect more aggressive, localized actions near some of these sensitive infrastructures when counter UAS is active. Unless the interagency process is tightened. There's a lot of people on the Hill that are pretty upset about this because it's embarrassing. You know, there's very little coordination between the Department of Defense and the FAA. If you're going to be testing, put it out. I believe in transparency. I mean, obviously, you don't want to describe the system that you're testing, its capabilities and limitations. I get that. But just say, and then be realistic. If you think it's only going to take a day, and oh, by the way, fellas, it really shouldn't have taken, 10 days of a restriction is a little excessive. You just shut it down for a day and you do it overnight where civilian aircraft are minimally impacted. But this civil and military coordination, it's not a paperwork problem. It's a readiness vulnerability when you think about it. Reuters reports that lawmakers call the episode a real coordination breakdown between the FAA and the Pentagon. And it was. AP reports that this event is tied to disputes around counter-drone measures and our interagency alignment. FAA has the overarching responsibility. So they're responsible for all airspace within the United States, civil aviation. Now, if it's an incursion, it falls within the military, but it has always been a cooperative effort between our friends in the military and the civil Federal Aviation Administration. So what happens if there's a real emergency? This same scene becomes catastrophic because now you have a delayed decision loop, contradictory messaging, fragmented command authority. So regardless of what they were actually doing, I stand by my opinion, it was probably counter UAS. It was the command and control failure that this highlights that I'm kind of latching onto. But, we talk about these cartel drones. This is a real national security problem. There's a lot of these. This is a real threat. Whether or not the specific trigger was truly cartel drones, the administration, Department of Homeland Security, their posture is increasingly explicit that cartel drones are a threat. They're doing surveillance. They're doing contraband drops. And in some cases, it's just intimidation. 27,000 is about the number that I have read. And that's during the last 6 months of 2024, which is the data that I was able to find for this particular story. So it's probably more, depending on, the time of year. That's 1,000 or more drones across the border every month, according to officials in early 2024. And some of these have been carrying, 3.5 pounds of fentanyl. That's a lot. It's an issue. We have some great counter drone technology that is coming online. We're actually going to be talking about it in our next story. So most of these drones that the cartels are flying, they do between 8 at night and 4 in the morning to help avoid and evade detection by flying under the cover of darkness. But we have systems coming online that will start to mitigate these. I think that the border should probably be ringed with electronic sensors. But yeah, that's probably it. I think there's a little bit more to this story, but I feel as if the wave tops have been handled pretty well. I would imagine that the things that are going to have to come out from this are better FAA and Department of Transportation guidance on counter UAS, better coordination between DoD and DHS. And you may just see reoccurring TFRs, flight restrictions, temporary flight restrictions around El Paso and that corridor and other border hubs if we continue to do counter drone mitigation. I don't know. So yeah. Let's continue our discussion on drones. We'll talk a little bit about Raytheon. They had a couple months ago tested what they're referring to as a Block 3 non-kinetic. Oh, first off, somebody got themselves a meritorious Navy Achievement Medal because we have recoined drones and other weapons that result in an effect as effectors. Yeah, it's not a drone anymore. I mean, it is. It's an unmanned aerial system or it's a drone, but the nature of the weapon is referred to as an effector. So I'm going to use that now. I'm just going to walk around town and just refer to parts of my body as effectors. He said knowingly. So Raytheon has been working on, and they're not the only ones, but this is a company that had just demoed some of their technology, and it's pretty interesting. Raytheon demonstrated this non-kinetic, reusable effector called the Coyote Block 3. It is capable of defeating multiple drone swarms, and it's doing so without blasting anything, without exploding. There's no net, and it can loiter and it can be reused. That's pretty cool. So this whole thing is tied to the Army's counter UAS assessment activity that has been ongoing. It's called Operation Clear Horizon. And this product is part of their acquisition strategy, and I have no doubt if found to be effective, and according to this report it is, it's probably going to matriculate down to not just other Department of Defense entities, but I mean, probably law enforcement and civilian. I mean, we talked about drones coming across the border in our last story. This is a great mitigation strategy. So non-kinetic here, as I said, it means no blast, no direct hit, and multiple observers, although I was not really able to deduce from the video that I watched of this what exactly was taking place, which is really the behind the curtains magic here. There is no defeat mechanism that has been publicly described. And the footage that I saw did not show a collision. You can check this out. You can go on to Raytheon's website, look up the Coyote. It's probably on YouTube, for gosh sakes. Coyote non-kinetic. They have 3 different flavors. They have a non-kinetic, they have a kinetic, and they have one other version. It's not a hybrid. I don't know how to describe it. So this is positioned as the loiterable and recoverable counter UAS designed to defeat these swarms while minimizing collateral damage. Because it doesn't explode and it doesn't ram into anything, you don't have to worry about it being used in areas that are sensitive, like airports, public airports. You can potentially fly this. It knocks out drone swarms. And yes, you do have a risk from falling debris from the drone swarms that have been knocked out, but there's nothing kinetic. There's nothing going boom. So this is pretty cool. This is part of the Army's LIDS, which is an acronym for Low, Slow, Small UAS Integrated Defense Systems. RTX, the parent company of Raytheon, has also, as part of this, touted their radar system, because you can't just fly the Coyote. You have to have this radar that ties into the detect and defeat kill chain. KURFS radar, it's a bit wonky. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole on this one because truly the Coyote is the star of the show here. Drone swarms, this is a threat. I think it's a threat, and it's going to get a bigger threat. In drone swarms, these swarms win because they bankrupt you, basically. They bankrupt you by intercept. I mean, some of these counter drone missiles, take the Iron Dome, for example, that Israel has. I mean, they're in upwards, depending on a whole host of factors. You're talking about $500,000. We were going to put missiles on the Zumwalt, and which is a Navy ship, an advanced stealth Navy ship, this destroyer, and AGS, this gun system that was going to fire these ship-to-shore 155 rounds, and they were supposedly going to cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million a round, and they were going to carry 90 of these on their ship. And the Navy just said, eat a bag of Richards. We're not spending that much. And so they ripped them off and they put something else on. But drone swarms capitalized on this. A lot of our current, and not just us, but globally, you talk about your air defense systems, they're very expensive missiles. And these missiles are designed to track aircraft or incoming missiles or, other airborne threats, but not a drone swarm. So you fire expensive rounds until you run out of them, or you just can't afford the burn rate. That's the beauty of swarms, is they're just so bloody and expensive. So when you have a recoverable effector, God, I love that word, that can service multiple targets per sortie, this is a huge explicit attack on that problem, because more kills per launch or load, less dependence on high-cost missiles, and more endurance under repeated waves. So this is pretty good. This demo, it fits the direction of travel, which is radar queuing, multiple defeat options. So you've got kinetic, non-kinetic, you have EW, which is electronic warfare, and you have directed energy. Lasers, for example. All of those are methods, and you want to have these defenses layered. Some of the drones that are coming online, and this is just a measure countermeasure. So we come up with something that disrupts drones in flight. The drone producer or adversary comes up with a way to shield them or make them less susceptible. So you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You want a couple different options. You are going to need kinetic, you are going to need EW, and you are going to need directed energy. But this non-kinetic effector is fantastic, especially when you can use it near friendly forces and infrastructure that is sensitive to blast. So this is good. And we've talked about drones before and the massive shortfall the United States has in drone warfare, and just how successful it has been in Ukraine, and how it is pretty much anticipated to dominate the battlefield for the next foreseeable future. Having a mitigation strategy is huge, and this is an affordable option in according to them anyways, a growing demand and expansion of Coyote production. So that's the subtext. Really, the Pentagon wants counter swarm capability that can be fielded widely, not just this science project. This is great for convoys. This is great for FOB perimeters, forward operating bases. This is great for forward arming points. Anywhere where you have a loitering drone that can just run a racetrack and could potentially knock out swarms or individuals. Short notice, you could use it for that. Yeah. And then anywhere where, dense airspace would preclude using explosives, airports, around national capital regions, something like that. What's really fascinating, though, is that, and I understand why, is that Raytheon has not described the defeat mechanism. So we don't know how this is working. I would assume that there are some constraints. It is not a magic bullet until we know how they're knocking these things down. Or we're probably not, but is it MCON? Is it RF? Is it EW? How are you knocking these things out? Because that's going to tell you how our adversaries can possibly mitigate them. Now, you, me, we're not going to find that out. It's probably a highly held trade secret. And even if it's not, it's classified, and we're just not going to do it. Remember, demos are not doctrine. This has to still be fielded. There has to be protocols for it. There has to be an SOP developed on how we're supposed to use it. How do we do blue on blue deconfliction? And then what do you do when you demonstrate it beyond the swarm size? Is there a limit? I don't know, all that stuff. Yeah, I like it. I think we're off to a great start. I would absolutely expect our adversaries to adapt pretty fast. This is on open source, so I'm reading it, you're reading it, China is, Russia is, Iran, North Korea, a lot of our adversaries as well. So definitely a step in the right direction. Okay. Let's talk about Chinese. I want to visit the Chinese GPS. When you think about GPS, it's pretty much a ubiquitous term. There's a huge swath of my generation that didn't really have this as ubiquitous as it is now. In fact, a GPS was kind of a special thing. It was bespoke. GPS is an acronym. I'm sure that you're aware of it, but if you're not, it stands for Global Positioning System. And this is a system that goes all the way back to the Vietnam War. Out of the Vietnam War, we determined that we needed a way to precisely locate people on the ground. We needed to know where we were on the ground, because if we knew where we are, we can find out a whole host of other information. And more importantly, we can tell other things where we are or where we don't want those things to be. Missiles, bombs, all kinds of stuff. So we invented the Global Positioning System. It was a DARPA invention. It started as a Navstar satellite constellation system, and it is a mix of satellites in space and stations on the ground. And the whole thing works off time. As we know that radio waves travel at the speed of light, it's calculable. And if I'm holding a GPS receiver on the ground and a satellite in space sends a radio wave, it should take X amount of time to get to my receiver. And if I do that 3 times, I can now triangulate myself. And that's how it works. And it started out as a military-only product. It was available for the military and then later in limited release towards aviation and ships. But it was still not available all the time, everywhere. Because it was military in nature, we had the ability to spoof it. We could deliberately put errors into that signal. If we were operating in war, like let's say the first Gulf War, we would encrypt that signal from the satellite where only U.S. military receivers with the appropriate encryption could decrypt it. So we could deliberately infuse errors into the signal for those that didn't have the right crypto. Why is this important? We're getting there. Way back in the 90s, and for some of you, that's way back. For me, I swear to God, it seems like yesterday. There was the third Taiwan Strait crisis. This took place in 95 and 96. A Taiwanese president, I believe it was the president. You're going to have to forgive me. I'm pulling all of this from memory for the most part. A very high-ranking Chinese official, I believe it to be the president of Taiwan, left Taiwan and went to the United States to meet with then President Clinton. And that really upset the Chinese because, remember, for 75 years plus, they have been under the belief that Taiwan belongs to them, whereas Taiwan believes that they are an independent country. So Taiwan retaliated. They did amphibious landing exercises in the Strait of Taiwan. They put naval ships out there, and they also fired some missiles. 3, to be exact. One of these missiles hit the target that they were supposed to hit, which was, I want to say, an island or a target that was 30 miles away from Taiwan. Again, you're asking me to pull all of this from memory, so, give me a little bit of latitude here. They fired this missile and it hit its target. They fired another 2 missiles. Both of them were lost. I mean, completely lost. At that time, all of these missiles were piggybacking on the United States Global Positioning System, which it's a satellite constellation in space. It's open to everybody. But in this instance, when the United States responded to China's military buildup, or show of force is the better way to say it, we put 2 carriers in that area and we spoofed the GPS. And we didn't tell anybody we were going to do this. And I don't know if they've actually admitted it to this day, but they did. Everybody knows they did. And these 2 missiles lost guidance. They disappeared. This is an incident that Beijing considered a major humiliation because it made the Chinese lose face. They don't like losing face. It started a 24, 25-year-old development to never, ever outsource critical combat dependency to your adversary. And there's a whole host of technologies that have manifested as a direct result. And this isn't Brad. This is people with PhDs. They're as a direct result of this humiliating incident. There's a lot of other technologies that China has shored up. And one of the pinnacles is their version of GPS. Now, GPS is uniquely American. Since we invented it, there's been others. You know, Russia has its own. Europe has one. So, yes, a U.S. GPS will work globally, but you don't go to Russia and buy a GPS. Theirs works on GLONASS, and there's other systems. So China just launched their own. And I don't mean just launched as in, congratulations, the first satellite went up. I mean, this thing went live, and it went live globally. It is BeiDou. And why does it matter? Because this is China's assured PNT backbone. That is an acronym again: position, navigation, and precision timing. What's different about this is it makes our GPS look like a 1979 Pinto. When did they stop making the Pintos? Ooh, or an AMC Pacer. There's a shit box. They're driving a brand new modern car. We're driving something that's 30 years old because we have not improved our GPS infrastructure at all. So this gives the People's Republic of China sovereign PNT for weapons, forces, and networks without relying on GPS. So that's the core military significance, but it's a lot more than that. This is an incredible system. This is not just GPS-like. This adds regional short messaging, plus user tracking features that can act as an auxiliary command and control. So think Blue Force Tracker. So if you're operating in a contested or austere environment, this thing still works because they have ground-based stations that are broadcasting. Our ground-based stations pretty much act as command and control nodes. Our ground control stations, and there's five of them around the world, we basically make sure that the satellites are maintaining their orbit, that their software is running the way it's supposed to, that the time is accurate, all going off the atomic clock in Colorado. Theirs not only does everything that I just said, but they've also added ground-based PNT. That's great because now you can't depend on one modality for your PNT. If our adversaries shoot down our global positioning satellites, which there's every indication that they will in a conflict, we don't lose precision navigation. I don't think you really appreciate just how important of a technology this is. Yeah, our phones navigate us everywhere now. But back in the day, which was a Wednesday, by the way, we used to have to pull up paper maps. Yeah, kids, you don't know how to do that, do you? I don't blame you. You have no expectation to. If we lose the ability to precision navigate, so does our aircraft, our naval vessels, our missiles, all of the military hardware that depends on precision, navigation, time. It's gone. So the implications for the U.S., this is structural. In a Pacific fight, we're not just going to be facing an adversary that can be switched off, like the third Taiwan Strait crisis of 95, 96. We cannot simply spoof GPS, denying our adversaries the luxury of PNT while we enjoy it. We are now facing an adversary with its own resilient PNT, and this raises the burden exponentially on the U.S. and allied EW, electronic warfare, cyber, and counterspace. Counterspace, that which counters the things above us, not where I put my breadbasket, counterspace. I thought it was funny. This raises the value for sure. So this constellation plus this ground segment and the user ecosystem, according to a 2024 Department of Defense report, BeiDou has 49 operational satellites and notes global versus agency Pacific accuracy standards. So what I mean by that is globally, you have 3.6 meter positioning for the public. So anywhere on the planet, anyone who uses this system knows where they are within 3.6 meters. If you are in Asia Pacific specifically, that improves to 2.6 meters. And you ready for this? Encrypted users have position accuracy to 10 centimeters. That's better than ours. Officially, China is framing BeiDou as global, all-time, all-weather, high-accuracy PNT. Why does the People's Liberation Army care? Because reasons I just said. When it comes to warfare, timing is king. Precision timing synchronizes networks, sensors, data links, electronic warfare, missile salvos, unmanned aerial vehicle swarms, logistics. If you can keep time and position in a jammed environment, you can keep fighting. And the ability for these systems to have person-to-person messaging, bro, now you can command and control troops on the battlefield with, granted, it's limited, but order acknowledgement, fragos, and you know where all your people are in real time. This is a huge force multiplier. This is going to allow more independent missile fires for them, glide bombs, loitering munitions, artillery rockets. Yeah. Let's see. What else do I want to talk about when it comes to this? This is going to help out in so many different ways. And I think it just shows the fragility of the U.S. system by comparison. I'm still blown away by this regional short message communication capability. This adds a layer of command and control, mass communications. You could send out mass messages to the battlefield amongst all of your BeiDou users and user tracking. So even if you degrade the satellite or terrestrial comms, they have a very durable messaging-like functions that can at least give units a thin but durable coordination channel. I think it's pretty amazing. This is going to be huge in a Pacific Island campaign, the likes of which we anticipate as the next regional conflict. This is where it can optimize coverage, augmentation, user equipment. It's, This system It's unknown whether it has spoofing, but as I mentioned, for special users to locate themselves within 10 centimeters with encryption, that leads me to believe that there is spoofing capability. Yeah, but I don't know for sure. I like the fact that they have this backup ground node. They have done a lot of infrastructure behind all of this. This is big geopolitical leverage too, because they're now going to offer this service and incentive as part of their Belt and Road Initiative to partners that are aligned with them. So they're already talking about adoption across 100 plus countries in Africa, Asia, and Europe in civilian facing services. So that means that a lot of the world switches to a Chinese based standard. This helps out with their smart cities and their safe cities. And all of this tilts towards a People's Republic of China ecosystem. You don't want this. You don't want this. When you talk about GPS and BeiDou and Galileo and GLONASS and all of these augmentation services, many receivers really become multi-PNT receivers. Most modern day positioning systems are capable of using those aforementioned systems. You know, GLONASS is Russian. I want to say Galileo is Europe. Obviously, GPS is the United States, and now this BeiDou. The problem is that all of these using different systems can improve accuracy, but it increases the complexity of trust because now spoofing and meakening can thrive in that complexity. So I think this is a wake-up call towards the United States. This system is aged. Again, this came about, the very first satellite was launched as part of the GPS constellation back in the 70s. So we're talking, it's 50 years old. And it's time for a refresh, and it's time for an update. And you know what? DARPA, you may be working on that right now, and I am just not getting your newsletter. So what to watch for next? Expansion of regional augmentation, ground uplink infrastructure in the Pacific, definitely increased interference incidents. That's what I would look for next. But yeah, our response, I don't know if there is one. Let's see if there's anything else on my to-do list. Oh, yeah, I did want to mention this. Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, reached out a couple weeks back to Elon Musk, complaining that the Russians were using Starlink, and asked Elon to politely cut that shit out. And he did. And the Russians are scrambling because they were using, thousands of illegal Starlink systems to do command and control in the battlefield, because a lot of the radio has been jammed. A lot of the signals have been jammed. A lot of the, whether it's terrestrial, whether it's satellite communications, you have to have them. They were also putting Starlinks on drones, and basically the Ukrainians submitted a whitelist to Starlink, and Starlink turned everything else out. Oh, speaking of Starlink, there is a report that has come out, a couple of different news agencies, about the U.S. covertly getting Starlink into Iran to help the protesters stay online. I wonder what group of individuals was responsible for that. I can only think of a couple, but I think that's pretty amazing. It shows the ability to think outside of the box. I think Starlink is an amazing system. I know that Jeff Bezos and Amazon are launching theirs here pretty soon. I don't know why. I think that kind of saturates the market. It certainly saturates space, but the ability for the Iranians to broadcast a lot of their updates, their social media, all of this was in thanks almost entirely to Elon Musk's SpaceX Starlink. I think it's pretty good. The systems, the legal backdrop, yeah. We're going to leave that one alone. We'll probably have to circle back to this story because I want to do a little deeper dive and I want to look into this with a little more. But this is more than just Elon Musk turning it on. This is state action, procurement, logistics, covert distribution. So there's more to this than I would like to just do a drive-by on. But this, yeah, operationally, this changes the street level fight. So we're probably going to revisit this more. I think that's the update for today, February 13th. I do apologize for not releasing tonight's episode on its usual time slot, but look, sometimes production schedules slip. Sometimes I wait for stories that I think are on the horizon to drop. I have been keeping my eye closely on the Iranian and U.S. negotiations, which have not really bore much fruit. The second carrier strike group on its way into the region. It is coming up on a weekend, and I privately wondered if we weren't about to launch sorties into Iran, but if we do, we'll break in with breaking news. Be that as it may, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Continue to stay tuned, and I will continue to give you my unvarnished opinion and, of course, recommendations on what to drink while enjoying it. So, until next time, as always, I am Brad Colbert, the Iceman, encouraging you to stay frosty.
Improvise, adapt, and overcome.